Why is Africa, the world's youngest continent, still ruled by some of the oldest presidents? Think about it. The average African is just 20 years old, but many of our leaders are in their 80s and 90s, rewriting constitutions just to stay in power. From Cameroon's Paul Biya at 92 to Ivory Coast Alassane Ouattara at 83, is Africa truly free if its youth can't lead? In this video, we look into a third debate. Why do old presidents still rule a young Africa?
Why do these presidents keep scrapping term limits when a massive 72% of Africans say that they do not want them? Who is empowering this contradiction?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it is just due to a personal zeal, to cling to power, the hunger for power, the hunger to rule. And in Africa, what we see is it seems as if the more you rule, the more you want to continue doing so. But also the enabling system that these leaders put in place, they surround themselves with men and women who seem to enable, their excesses. And so I think it's very easy for them to get comfortable when those around them seem to encourage them and let them know that you're still highly loved by the people, you're still the people's choice. They keep on clapping for them and making them think that it is okay, to continue clinging to this power. But I also think that the fear or the uncertainty of what becomes of them when they no longer are in that position of power can be one of the reasons why they do not want to go.
I absolutely agree with you. Now let's come back to you, Levi. Levi, speaking of that, how much does the phenomenon of old leaders in young populated countries reflect constitutional or even legal manipulation? I'm talking age limits being removed, term limits being reset, versus simply voter preference. Because recently, Ouattara argued a 2016 constitution reset, to reset his term count. Before he comes back, we'll try to work on your audio. Let me pass that question to you, Yemi.
Yeah, I think you hear me. So thanks for having me, by the way. I think it's important to understand how all these despots and autocrats manage to do what they've been doing. And we also need to, it's staggering because we also need to understand that the 7 out of the 10 world leading 7 autocrats, 7 out of 10 of them are actually in Africa, apart from the monarchs. So I think we need to understand the basis which these people are able to extend their staying in power, first of all, by changing the constitution, by changing the term. Because most of them come in as a reformer. There are case studies. Mugabe came in as a reformer then. And the despot in Rwanda, Kagame, came in as a reformer. Museveni in Uganda came in as a reformer. So they all come in as a reformer. Then they get worse over time. And at the point at which they get worse is at the point where they change their term. That's where it all starts from. So, and I think they're able to get away with some of these things because they have enablers, they have defenders. And most of these defenders argue that these old people are the only one with the experience to bind the fragile society together. They are the only ones that can bring society together. Society is very complicated. Most African countries have different ethnic groups. So most of these enablers, that's what they argue for. But in the real sense, that's not the case. Because we all know in the real sense, what tends to happen is they extend their stay, they harass opposition.
Yeah.
People pay under them, people go on exile. And most of all the goodies in the society is being distributed to their tiny inner circles. So at the end of the day, the country stays poor.
Okay, now let's pass same question to Levi. Levi, speak to us. What role does generational perception of the older leaders being out of touch, physically and mentally unable to connect with the younger citizens play in shaping political legitimacy? Because one youth in Cameroon, said that Biya is too old to govern, and that it's exhausting to know only him as president from when he was born till at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that generational perception plays a whole lot. It plays a whole lot not only on the path of the youth, on the part of the youth, but also on the side of the aged and the middle-aged people themselves, because everyone across the board is dissatisfied that they can't have the same person ruling year after year, decade after decade, and there's just no change. And the generation gap itself entails and implies that there is a loss of touch, that there is a disconnect between two generations. The younger generations or the younger generation always clamoring for change, and the older generation believing that they could do better. So there is always and it's something that's supposed to be dynamic and not static. And there is always the divide, the kind of conflict of the old saying, if age but could and if youth but new. But this is not something that the older generation want to ram down the throats of the young every now and then. I think it was the speaker who spoke in the first place who said that the older people, they come and they build a kind of caste and they make it ironclad. I think you yourself, as host, you did say that the people across the board in Africa, they put in watertight constitutions. They always come up with a slogan to impose constitutional change. So they stay in power almost forever. But the unfortunate thing is that time always catches up with them. When they saw this term limit initially at the dawn of independence, they didn't believe that the time would come when these terms would eventually expire. So when they saw these terms threatening to expire and just around the corner, they started maneuvering and political maneuverings and then constitutional change that swept across Africa. But again, they come in with rules of the game that are not fair at all, because they put in place a referendum. We saw President Denis Sassou Nguesso do it next door in Congo Brazzaville. We saw President Biya do it back in 2008, where they give an impression that it's the will of the people. They go and they manipulate the media, the masses, segments of the civil society, even religious bodies, to come out and say, no, we want the constitution to change so as to uplift term limits. But then there is a disconnect, whether you like it or not. Yeah. And then every drug, as I say, has an expiry date. We've seen in regimes where the ruling class wants to make people know that the majority, in their general sense, want the constitution to be modified for presidents to stay in power for as long as they stay alive. But then the disconnect comes when the youth rise up and then they protest, like we see in Cameroon recently, like we see in the Ivory Coast, in La Côte d'Ivoire recently. So this is a gangrene in Africa's society, in the African society. There is this problem of leadership. They seem never want to understand, and that's why not only the youth themselves, but everybody can not understand why people are aging, people can barely walk, people can barely coordinate their senses, yet they still want to cling to power. It's a veritable tragedy, I must say.
Yeah, Levi. Now, speaking of Cameroon, let's come to you, Aga. Aga, you are Cameroonian, and we know that in many parts of Africa, the median age is 20, while in Cameroon, it's just 18. And Biya has just secured another term. So looking at the stark generational gap, how sustainable is leadership that remains dominated by, these older incumbents in countries where populations are overwhelmingly young?
It's not just an intergenerational problem in Cameroon, okay? The fact that he's 92, he will soon be 100. If he takes on this term of 7 years, he might, be 99 by the time it ends. It is true that biologically, we understand that human beings have a diminishing physical and mental faculty as they age. That is true. But the problem here is not just the age. If it was the age only, we will not the majority of Cameroonians will not be clamoring for Issa Chiroma, who is himself in his late 70s, to be a president. It is because of the bad governance, that is the real problem. We understand in Africa that age comes also with wisdom. And so we respect elderly people. We respect them. But if an elderly person is not a role model, if an elderly person doesn't set a good example, then the younger generation begins to disrespect them. It is not just because they are old that it's the problem. No, far from it. It is because Cameroonians are complaining of terrible social and economic living conditions. We are complaining about the deteriorating security conditions. We are complaining about the high cost of living and all the other terrible conditions in which we find ourselves today as Cameroonians. The young people do not have jobs. As a matter of fact, there were young candidates who stood for this presidential election as well, but they were not even amongst the first two. Why? We have Cabral Libby, who is in his 40s, but I think he came third with just about 2.something%, in the overall result. Is he not a young person? Why would Cameroonians not have preferred him to Issa Chiroma Bakari? So I really want to come back here to say that it is not just about the age. It's about the results. What do you give us irrespective of your age? That's the problem here. Thank you.
All right. Now, coming back to you, Yemi, now critics have actually noted that the ruling parties control electoral commission, security forces, and even state media. So how do these institutional controls, shape the nature of competition and legitimacy of elections in African countries?
Use for these things. It's a simple template. It's not complicated at all. And the first thing is they extend their term. They change whatever, maybe the constitution or whatever they want to change. Then they pretend they want to hold an election just for the sake of it. It's just to tick a box. We all know the elections always get stolen at the end of the day. So that's template number 2 or point number 2. Number 3, they get the army on their side. And what does that mean? It means in case of any protest, the army can suppress it. So that's what. And number 3, the third template they use it, they get the judges and the courts on their side as well. So if the army doesn't work, if the protest doesn't work, if they can't suppress it, you go to the courts. The judges work for them too. That's always been the template. Russia uses it. Vladimir Putin has been using it as well. Across the board with autocrats, that's what they do. And in the case of Cameroon, I suspect that's what's going on as well, because the whole institution has been compromised. So the election itself is usually it's never going to be free and fair. There's people working behind the scenes. They have enablers. And like I said earlier, some of these enablers will argue that these old people are the only one that can bind together the complicated society, because they argue that sometimes democracy can be very messy, and these are the old people that can fix it, that can make things happen. The problem is when that happens, most of these old people, some of the good things of the society that is meant to create opportunity for the people, those things are distributed to their inner circles. And when that happens, that's poverty. That's going to lead to poor economic growth. Nothing is going to work. And that's what we begin to see. The only thing I'm worried about now in terms of young people as well is we are beginning to see signs of some young people across Africa trying to be an autocrat too. An example, across the Sahel, the military junta in Burkina Faso is a young guy. But has he promised elections since he's been there? I don't think he's ever promised any elections.
No, he has not.
I begin to see the trend of all these things across. So even being young as well, for me, is probably not good enough. It's the reorientation of the young people to come together and to have a common purpose. Because to me, it's not really about the age. I'm beginning to see the young ones even trying to copy them across the Sahel region. None of the military guys in power promised elections in Africa, and that's disappointing.
Well, it's a good thing you brought up, Burkina Faso, which is military-led. Coming back to you, Levi, given that so many recent coups have followed a leader defying term limits, are these endless mandates actively inviting military intervention?
Yes, that's what is on the plate. That's what you have on the menu when you clamp down on your people for so long, when you quell any kind of uprising, when you don't allow a free democratic space, when you make people to understand that no matter how the rules of the game are going to be set, they are going to favor you. The trend is the same across the continent. You would eventually end up inviting coups. Of course, we know that their effects are always devastating. But if things continue the way they are, at the end of the day, coups would become inevitable. That's why even the leaders who are as Machiavellic as they can be, they try to put in place some kind of mechanism that would discourage eventual coup plotters from running through with their agenda. But then, at the end of the day, it will be cause and effect. Because look across Africa, in West Africa, the winds of change that started blowing there some years back. I look at Niger, I look at Guinea-Conakry, I look at Burkina Faso, I look at Mali. All these regimes fell because they were not open to change. And the military leaders, of course, Yemi says that when these leaders come, they don't want to organize elections. It's the same thing. When you allow the malady of the older generation to inhabit you, to invade and inhabit you, these things will start showing. That's why even some of these leaders themselves came in through a coup. And they promised their people reforms. The reforms are not there. 10, 20, 30 years down the line, they just want to sit in power. And these coups and this civil disobedience is something that at the end of the day, we would have to deal with if care is not taken. In Cameroon, we are all seeing that it's almost unprecedented. I think the popular uprising that we find in Cameroon today was not there even in 1992, which we all consider as the period when there was maximum turmoil and tumult in the civil society space and in the political space in Cameroon. So if these people continue this way, one way or the other, the silence and the patience of the people can never be tested forever. So yes, I want to answer your question and say that at the end of the day, they would invite, it could be direct military coup, or it could be civil unrest that would eventually call in either a military or a civilian leader to step up and then oust, or the president eventually resigning himself, like we saw at the time of the Arab Spring.
Okay. Now, coming back to you, Aga, earlier, Yemi talked about, enablers, and he talked about some of these military coup leaders promising elections. But we also have these presidents saying that the reason why they're resetting the term limits or even stretching the term limits is for continuity's sake. They want stability. But can the argument of stability legitimately outweigh arguments for renewal of leadership? Where should the balance lie?
No, it can never outweigh. I mean, nobody should ever think that they're irreplaceable, that the world and what society can't do without them, because that's not true. I think as what you have done, it is always important to believe that there are others out there that can even do better. And so that is why it is important to have an alternate. You do your part and then you give way for someone else to come, do theirs. I understand that this narrative or this excuse of unfinished business comes up a lot. I mean, we saw it with Ouattara in Ivory Coast when he first, when he decided to run again. And he said, hey, look at all these economic projects, the structural, infrastructural innovations that I have brought, and I'm not yet done. Give me time to finish them. I have this program and this and that. And what have we now? They don't just come to an end abruptly. If that is the excuse we want to use, then believe me, we'll just have monarchies, okay? Because then there's always going to be something that is unfinished. And so for me, that should not be an excuse. We need to build our countries. We need to build our governance systems in such a way that they do not rely on individuals to get work done, but that the foundation is strong enough for any other person to take over from where the predecessor left and continue with the vision for the betterment of the country.
All right. Now, coming back to you, Yemi, and the betterment of the country and the continent in itself, why do you think that the AU and ECOWAS are so often quiet or even ineffective when their own member states openly trample some of these democratic norms?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's, to be honest with you, that's beyond me as well, because you would think ECOWAS or African Union would be able to put a lot of pressure on these countries to behave. Nigeria tried it when the Niger, or I think it was Niger that seized power. They wanted to put the pressure, even threaten military action, but nothing came out of it. And I think part of the issue is because most of all these countries in Africa as well are facing their own internal struggles. For example, I don't think we can expect Kagame in Rwanda to say something about what Biya is doing in Cameroon, because he's guilty as well. He's doing the exact same thing in Rwanda and changing terms and suppressing opposition and all that. Also, at the same time, we can't expect Cote d'Ivoire as well to meddle into what's going on in Cameroon. So I think it would have been nice if African Union was more organized and they can exert all this pressure on other African countries to behave, but we're not seeing that, and that's been disappointing. My only guess is maybe because they're facing their own internal struggles, economic issues. Some of them are guilty of extending their stays in power as well. Like I said, out of 10 long-serving leaders in the world, 7 of them belong to Africa. So that's quite statistics there. It's the only thing I can guess as to why African Union or ECOWAS has not been able to put pressure on all these leaders extending their stays in power. So with fingers crossed, maybe in future things might begin to change.
Well, speaking of that change, we've actually seen, a peaceful transition in Senegal, very successful. Do you think that, Levi, that this success makes some of our leaders uncomfortable? It puts uncomfortable pressure on leaders like Biya and Ouattara? Levi?
Of course, it makes them tilt and twitch with discomfort. And that's why I tell you something that happened in Cameroon. When Bassirou Diomaye Faye won the elections in Senegal, very quickly pro-regime political actors went on air and started saying, nobody asked them, they just started saying, oh, please mind you Cameroonians that we have nothing to learn from Senegal. Cameroon has got no lesson whatsoever to receive from Senegal because Cameroon is a democracy. Cameroon has been working well and functioning well over the past decades, and it's thanks to the savoir-faire of President Biya that the country is on its feet. You see, because they very quickly know that the world is watching and the entire populace is looking up to them and saying, hey, this happened in Senegal. Why don't we rejuvenate our political class? And all of this is because these people over the years have carefully built a person-oriented political system. It's not institutionally based. Otherwise, they would take their time to build strong institutions. But no, they build a cult around someone's personality. It's sad to say. But yes, it makes them uncomfortable. When they see Emmanuel Macron comes to visit a country like Cameroon or like Cote d'Ivoire, and they find the two presidents and they are generations apart, and yet they could speak and address issues with more or less relative comfort. I hear political analysts say that they are surprised and they feel uncomfortable when they find President Macron, who is relatively young, and an older president, say in the Gulf of Guinea, and the president doesn't have enough mastery, enough franc-parler, as they say in French. He can't express himself with ease like any other president would do, and they quickly begin to see the weakness of the older president, something the handlers of these presidents will not want to come out in the open. So yes, they are uncomfortable when they see younger presidents emerging from other countries and other democracies as well. Abdou Diouf had called Abdoulaye Wade and congratulated him. He handed power in a peaceful election. Abdoulaye Wade handed power to Macky Sall. Macky Sall, albeit reluctantly, handed power to Bassirou Diomaye Faye. So it's unthinkable that some presidents come out and say that they have unfinished business, and at the same time, it's a shame and it's a sham, because they cannot all the time want to force it down our throats that they've got unfinished business. We will ask them the fundamental question: do you want to tell us, dear Mr. Sit-tight President, that if you die today, the country dies with you?
Okay.
Umar Musa Yar'Adua died in Nigeria, and the country is on its feet today.
All right, Levi. Now, we're actually about wrapping up, but let's hear from Aga. Aga, your final thoughts, and tell us if you feel that if the ballot box keeps failing the people, what is the final inevitable route that the frustrated young majority will take to force generational change?
I think it's already happening. I mean, the protests. We've been in a situation of uncertainty since October 12th. And it continues. I mean, from the look of things, it might not end anytime soon. And if it continues this way, I think that it will only degenerate and so on. So it has started. I'm not a prophet of doom, but I think if nothing is done, and once again, if the powers in place try to continue clamping down or, repressing those who are protesting, it might really go out of hand. Okay.
Now let's hear your final thoughts as well, Yemi.
Yes, I can only hope that the young people will come together more, not just social media activism. They have this sense of togetherness, because most of what these autocrats do is to kind of divide the young people. It's like divide and conquer. So if you make the young people divisive and all that, it's easy to conquer them. So if young people hopefully can be able to come together, through social media have some togetherness and seriousness of purpose, they may be able to actually create a good movement. And just the last thing to Levi as well. I think I'm aware that I suspect Trishidi, the president there, is trying to extend his stay at some point. I think he's thinking about it. I don't know.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, let's hope that doesn't happen. Levi, 1 minute, your final words as well.
Okay, my final word is that as an institution or as a people, we should always clamor for strong institutions, because if we don't have strong and credible institutions, at the end of the day, we would have what we find across the board. Every leader having a thirst for power, and once he has the taste for power, he wants to cling on to power, and then he builds institutions that are weak, that are manipulable, but strong institutions are what we need. Otherwise, we would have what we are finding across Africa now. And I guess my take is that the ball that has been set rolling will not stop until the political ruling class sees that there is need for change.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen and a lady, for joining us at this time.
Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more updates.